mini-series before the actual presenter, so I'm just going to be reading a few poems, and then we can get started with the main thing. I do historic preservation in Helena. That's my main job. So I just actually got back from field school in Idaho, where we were doing log work and working on some old log buildings. So tied in a little bit, but most of my poems are nature stuff. Okay. So this first one is a couple of poems together about migration and thinking about how it relates to my own life. Okay. The sky is full of birds gliding and gilded in the sun setting. They shimmer, glimmering across the wind-whipped waves that lap over the lake rock. And I shimmer too, back and forth, back and forth. And I am sure the same wind that drives them to warm summer north pushes at my back too. I am tousled. My hair darts and dances like the swallow skulls in the cliff, wild and free and flowing and flying and flying. Except I am alone. My goose flesh brings no flock, no flying bee pointing away to haven or home. When the wind turns south, in my senses, my heart, where will I go? The meadowlark trills in the twilight. In a second. What is lost when leaves fall, and what lingers when needles remain? What is said about a place that has all of one and none of the other? In winter, I dream of rushing water and the warmth of an Arctic sun arcing across my skin. In summer, I yearn for the quiet peace and the cool wind of winter. Am I looking for what I do not have and neglecting what I do? I have so many questions, and yet I have only found an answer in the sweetness of a date on your tongue. I saw 10 white pelicans bobbing in the Missouri. We shared a big mouth gate at the shimmering shapes below. We'll soon share a flight to the other shore, but I've written this poem before. Do I stay or do I soar? Must I choose? Do blues always lead to blues? I am loon, mourning the slip of the blood-red moon behind the clouds. And this one's called Ponder, Ponder. Meditation on my life, I guess. The search for permanence is a fool's errand, and I have been a fool again and again. For all things come to an end, and I don't know where to begin. I take the road by your place that I may see you in passing, but these roads run a jilting race, and missteps are exacting. Is mourning that which is not yet lost the same as hoping for that which will never be? And yet there is no mystery like that which ripples behind your eye, no surety like the sun shining where we lie. This one's called Stampede of Orion. It's about two dear friends of mine. 100 dancing horses, 100 dancing horses prancing across my brain, oh Lord. Scouts streaked in the belt of Orion, stars scattered wild in the birth of horizon. 333, this one's for you, and for you, and for me. For what's eternity without its holy motif? The eye that binds is dappled with green and gold, radiant, a heraldry of old. In you, riding all honeysuckled and heaven sent, new to the world and what is meant. In me, heart strong but head weak. There go the bays, roans, Appaloosas. May we serve a cause that could use us, read it fast and hard till the night consumes us. And here's a pair of poems that I wrote on the winter and summer solstice of this year. On this, the shortest of days, I stretched long into myself, searching for a stillness in the song of dark. To say, this lightless morn is not all stolid emptiness in the holding of hands. There is solace in the steady swoop of the red-tailed over oak and sycamore, in its furtive eye fixed on the horizon. On this, the longest of days, I leave short my troubles, filling my mind with lilac and elderberry, to stand in this stillness alive with warble and coo and know that I and you are true. I do not dread the coming dark. The sun is melding the sky, and it is setting, sinking slowly into me. This poem is called A Bouquet. It's just a love poem. I will be your wild hyacinth, blue and blooming with all the vigor and vibrance of spring. For you, I am always springing and skipping and hopping, fresh and fragrant, a tumbling brook, the noonday sun. Forest green, chartreuse, robin's egg blue, in these colors I shine for you. For you, I dance in the meadow, I dance in the breeze. Make me your morning star, twinkling, twirling, whirling in this cosmic tide that neither you nor I fully understand. Hold me in your hands, breathe deeply, and drink of my nectar, sweet and crisp. And here's my last one, called An Olive Rapture. But a cool experience I had sleeping in my truck, and I was exposed to the elements, and there was a Russian olive tree nearby, and there was a full moon, a storm. All right. My life has been a tale of shaded leaf and the hiding of light. But here, under this holy dark night, I'm a pirate, greedy for the pale moon that shines like a pearl on high. My, oh my, I'm transfixed, transposed, transformed. There's wind in my sails, and I stand upon the bow, reveling in this ocean of sky that roils and rolls over the hills of my own. I am not alone. The Russian olive, stooped like a mystic, rustles its secret. All of thee is framed in this tree, in the full moon gleaming with the joy of your ancestors who sang of spirit and the pang of love. He says, hide not your face behind branch and bough, be the moon, swooning, star-drunk through the lightning-crackled night. And so I will.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to the Montana Book Festival, and thank you for coming to Yvonne Pepin-Wakefield's presentation of how I built a log cabin. We're very excited to have you with us, and I'll just give a short bio, and then the rest will be Yvonne Pepin-Wakefield also publishes under Yvonne Wakefield, is a writer and artist who lives and works on Oregon's shore of the Columbia River. She is the author of Babe in the Woods, Building a Life One Log at a Time, Babe in the Woods Self-Portrait, and the soon-to-be-released Babe in the Woods Path of Totality, the last in the series, and Suitcase Filled with Nails, Lessons Learned from Teaching Art in Kuwait. And I'll let you take it away.
That's pretty succinct. Yeah. Thank you for all having me. I think the last time I was in Missoula, I don't think I've ever been in Missoula where there hasn't been snow. So I would ski at Whitefish. Whitefish, is that the one? And there was a little ski place. Do you remember the name of that? Maverick? Yeah, I used to ski at this little place, and they made cream puffs for 25 cents. It was so good. But that was a few years ago. So welcome to my presentation on building my log cabin. I've written 3 books of it about the experience. They're based on journals, but the journal entries have been taken and fleshed out into like vignettes and stories. So the first one, Babe in the Woods, Building a Life One Log at a Time, is about when I was 18, I went to Oregon and bought 80 acres and started to build a log cabin. I had no idea how to build anything. The only thing I'd ever built before was, I was the first girl in high school wood shop, and I got in over a lot of protesting, and I built one of those, those things you lay on when you get under cars. That and a cribbage board were my only experiences. So I bought this bow saw. I went up to the mountains, tried to fall the first tree, and it fell backwards, almost creamed me. So I hired this guy, Jim, and he and I built this log cabin with a chainsaw. We didn't have any other tools. Everything was done by hand. Cleared the trees from the area, so that made the aperture. Draw knifed them, bucked them up, and laid them up. But I didn't get an opportunity in my last workshop to read this, so you get a flavor of my writing style before I proceed on this. So just the first page is like I get to the cab, I get to this property, and I start to saw this tree, and it's in like snow up to here. A pine branch jacks open the paperback. Its pages flecked with snow and needles. Sweat drips off my forehead, freezes on the illustration I'm trying to follow to the T. I'm 18 years old, calf deep in snow on an 80-acre mountainside, sawing into a tree, building a home I lost 4 years ago. There is no cat no bubbly, and the lyrics written in frosty breath are really guttural sounds that rhyme with, oh, God, itch. And the reference to bubbly in lyrics was the night that my mother died, I was officially then an orphan at 14. And I thought, if I can make it until I get some inheritance, because I knew I'd get some inheritance, I would buy property in the wilderness, get a van, get a case of cold duck and a cat, and go up there and write poetry. Okay, and then that vision kept me going through 4 years of awful foster care system. So I get to the cabin. So I put the book out, and I'm sawing my first tree. A book on how to build a cabin is propped in the snow. Long hair falls in front of my eyes, and I brush it back with my mitten each time I bend to study ink drawings, diagramming the sequence and angle of the upper, under, and back cut. I've been studying those pages for an hour. All I've really learned when it's so cold that snow won't melt is how easy it is to sweat through layers of flannel and wool, and what a bitch it is to saw down one goddamn tree. Cover your ears at the words. I swear each time I lean into that bow saw, I can hear that poor tree scream sharp as a steel I wield. Metal so cold, one lick of it and my tongue would be stuck until spring. Further intimacy with the pitted bow saw teeth, though, is absolutely the last thing on my mind as I concentrate on cutting into rough, pitchy bark bitch and slicing pitch clean through cadmium that's as pure and creamy as the inside of my thigh. Between the give and take of the blade, the bleed of pitch, I cross-reference the book. Judging by the diagrams, the upper and undercuts have a way to go before they meet in a textbook V, which leads me to think I should ditch vegetarianism because a breatharian, I swear, really can feel that tree's tortured screams as any living thing sliced alive. Maybe progress is slow because the bow saw is dull. It was cheap after all, 50 cents at a flea market, cheaper than the $3.95 book I bought in a used bookstore back in Minnesota city, so I can read about how to cut trees to build a log cabin in the Oregon wilderness. More likely it's me, a clueless, stringy-haired, 100-pound baby-faced teenager, fresh out of braces. I set the saw next to the book and stick my fingers into a pool of pitch and then spread it like cold honey along the cold cut, wishing it was paint, and I could simply create an image of that tree falling, and it would. If there were another book, I'd reference it. A different tool, I'd use it. But I'm stuck with what's on my hand, and that wounded tree continues to stand. Maybe it's true what they said, that I'm a damn fool with your head in the clouds. My experience with any other type of tool is limited to the last one I held, a ball-peen hammer with a mind of its own. So that leads into that ball-peen hammer actually goes back into actually one of the first things I built was a fort as a kid, like this big, and I broke 2 fingers when I hammered it. So I went up to this cabin. I bought this land when I was 18. The day I turned 18, I met with my trust officer, my legal guardian, and attorney, and it was when Nixon was being impeached or being pardoned, whatever. So I'm driving out west, and I'm I signed a paper to sell my Minnesota mining and manufacturing stock, which my father had, and that was going to pay for my land. So I'm driving through Oregon, around Oregon. I find this land, which wasn't for sale. I call the trust officer, I say, send me the money. Well, there wasn't enough money because the stock market was going like down. So anyway, I eventually went up there, decided to buy this log cabin, or build this log cabin, and lived partly in an old ratty shack and then in a pup tent in the wilderness. This property is at the end of this a wilderness road. Then the closest people were 5 miles down a road that most of the time you couldn't even drive up. Okay, and when I first went up there, I was 18. I did not have a truck, so everything that went up there was backpacked. Click. This is a really weird color situation, but this is basically how the cabin is now. If you're ever intending to build one, if somebody says don't put a lot of windows in, don't listen to them. Because the first year I was there and lived in there, it was so dark, I ended up having to put an extra window in and over here. And these windows all came from this old ghost town called Bates, Oregon. Click. This is just another lighting situation. It's built on a slope, so tamarack posts sunk 4 feet in below the frost line hold it up, and underneath here is like this storage where I put my tools and everything. Click. So when you read the first book, I just did a thing called Off the Grid, so I was prepared to live off the grid, and I did. And the Mormon people below me had taught me how to store 1 year's worth of food. So I bought these big plastic 5-gallon containers and brand new garbage cans, and I put like wheat and groats and powdered milk and all this stuff in these plastic things and put them in garbage cans under the cabin before I put this up. Well, the bears got it all. So I lost my 1 year provisions to the bears. So then I decided to board that up. Click. This is just a view from across the creek. Click. This is my home security system. I found this one day on the trail. This is original. This is like an antique. In fact, everything up there is an antique. It's like a museum. Prior to that, I just had a little eye hook thing on the outside, and I never had a lock until I ended up having issues with bears. But while we're here, Emery was talking. We were talking about chinking. We were talking about chinking, and he said this was called daubing. But when I built this cabin, I built with trees that still weren't seasoned, and everybody said all your chink's going to fall out. So, has anybody here built a log cabin? Okay, so we started out, we were going to do this butt-end method so we could avoid the notching, but it wasn't working out. So when we made the transition, there were a lot of gaps in here. So in the bigger gaps, there's pink fiberglass insulation in there with chicken wire stapled over it, and then I applied mortar to each one of these pieces, and it is the most monotonous work in the world. Click. This is my inside home security. So in the second book, Babe in the Woods Self-Portrait, I went up there to do another project, and I was inundated with rogue bears. The story I got was the Forest Service had dropped habituated bears from national parks up above in the Strawberry Mountain Wilderness, and there was a deer kill up above my draw, and they all smelled it, and then they ate on that, and then they came down to my cabin where I had my food refrigerated in the creek. And so that summer I was doing with bears. So I got this bear bolt. Actually, I made this bear bolt. Click. So this is the inside of the cabin. The colors are really kind of weird. This is still the same way as it was when I first moved. I did put in this little wood burner stove. There's a big fireplace stove over here, and I put that in because when I would be up in there in the winter, it's like it can be colder inside than it's outside if you leave it closed up for like a month. It's like a refrigerator. Logs are great insulators. And that's the same ladder I built when I was 18. I still use to go up in the loft. Click. This is a family furniture. I dragged a lot of my family furniture up there. Click. This is the stove, and it's a big open-faced Frontier stove. And I still do everything the same way I always did, is I haul water from the creek, chop my own wood. In fact, these are the same things I've used since I was 18. Click. So that's my light source. These are the same kerosene lamp same lamps I've been using forever. And I bought, over 40 years ago, I bought a 55-gallon drum of kerosene, which I'm still using today. And it cost like $30 back then, because kerosene was like 20 cents a gallon. I Googled kerosene. Now it's like $4 or $5 a gallon. So I still use the same light. People say, well, why don't you go solar? I said, no, because it's not authentic. It's not authentic to the cabin. Click. This is my, I do have running water. You get these 2 buckets. You put them in your hand. Click. And you go down, run down to the creek. You dip it in the creek and hope you don't fall backwards. And bring them up. Up until 2015, which was a huge forest fire up there, and they dumped tons of retardant all over. I never filtered the water because it comes directly out of Canyon Mountain, which is a glacier. I do now use a filter, so I pull it up and I pour it in a filter. Click. This is the bathing pool. Depending on the season, you can sit in there and it'll be up to your neck. And there's also native cutthroat trout in there. And I've trained them I take little pieces of bread and they jump up. So that's my company up there. Click. Outhouse, that one's been, I built that one originally, and then when the hole eventually filled up, I moved it and been using the same one ever since. Click. This is interesting. So when you use an outhouse, you put stuff in it so it doesn't stink. So this is a mixture of lime and ash that's in the outhouse. I put this picture on one of these websites, like Off the Grid Women or Homestead Women or something. It got like 8,000 hits, and they commented on the cup, which is a cup I bought at Pike Place Market 100 years ago. Click. And this is my source of wood, so it's the way it always is. I fall the trees. I no longer fall trees alone up there. And I was hit by a car 6 years ago, so I can't pull my chainsaw, so I have to have somebody up there to pull the chainsaw. But you fall the trees, you buck them into lengths, you either carry them down or you saw them up on the hill. And this is on a hillside, and I was up there just a couple weeks ago rolling these size logs down. Well, I tried to hit the woodshed so it would stop it. Well, a couple times it did, but then it blew the woodshed up. And then a couple other times they go like over the road and, poof, poof, and they hear them in the creek. So then I had to go up there and split them up and then kind of like toss them in little pieces. It's very labor intensive. I mean, you're up there 2 days and you start to harden up because you're not on a flat surface. You're always walking uphill or downhill. Click. This is the spa. This is the thing that makes this cabin. Oh, I need to put a picture of this. So right below the cabin, there's this little building, and it's my bathhouse. So I have a hose that's, this hose here runs outside the house. It goes up into the creek. I sink the hose in the creek. The water comes out through this hose. You don't block it. And then I fill this top barrel with water, and then when it's filled, I build a fire under here, and then when the water gets hot, you turn that nozzle, and it fills the bathtub. So you have a great hot bathtub. And it's also like in the winter, it's like a sauna in there. And when you've worked in the woods all day, it's the most fantastic thing. And you can bathe. In the summer, it's gotten really tinder dry up there, so I don't really bathe with that in the summer, but I'll use solar showers. And that's one of the things about Off the Grid. Solar showers like less than 5 gallons, 2.5 gallons. You know, is it usually 2.5 or 5? You can have a really good hot shower with just 2.5 gallons of water. When you take your other Ruly showers, you're like in there 20 minutes, and you can really get clean in a matter of just minutes with a solar shower. You know what solar showers are? It's like a big plastic bag you put in the sun with water, heats up, and then it's got a little hose. Click. So these are my tools. I actually have a lot more of them, and I still use them all for different purposes. You can see some of them are duct taped because I greenhorned it on the stump. But that's still what I use. I have to there's a wedge up here. You take a wedge. Like I can't, because of this neck injury, I can't split the way I used to, so I take like this metal wedge and you hit it with the maul until the log splits. Click. So this is, when I was building the cabin, we didn't have cell phones weren't invented, computers weren't, little laptops weren't invented. So there were basically no pictures of me building the cabin, just a couple that I didn't even know somebody took. But this is when I was building, after I built the cabin at 18, then I went to art school, And I had 3 summer months where I went up to the cabin. So I had June, July, and August to spend at the cabin. So I decided, well, I'm going to build a log studio. This is going to be like a post-log cabin building test. I'm going to use logs that I can carry all by myself, which were 14-foot logs, and nothing with too much of a diameter because I needed to lift everything. So I fell a bunch and started draw knifing them. And a draw knife is just this sharp knife, and you got to take the bark off of everything. And what's interesting about this picture is I didn't realize it until a couple days ago. I talk about my cat in Inupi. I had a Siamese cat when I was building this cabin, and there he is, right there. I didn't even realize it. But this cat was like a dog. He followed me everywhere. If I went out to go paint with my easel on my backpack, this cat was following me wherever I went. So each one of these logs had to have the bark stripped off. When I fell these trees in the fall, and then I left them, I had them skidded up by mules, and then I left them decked, and when I came back in the spring, I had to draw knife them. Well, the bark kind of like sucks up to the tree, the cadmium, and it's hard work. It's really hard work. I was just up there last week. I fell and bucked and draw knife 6 tamarack posts to make new stairs, and I'm in that same position. Then I was 5 months out of a second hip replacement with a neck injury, and I'm doing this stuff, and I'm going, I can do this. I'm still doing this. And you feel muscles that you don't know exist when you got that draw knife. Click. So each one of those logs had to be scribed, and this is when I'm working on the studio. So you take the log, and you know what protractors are, and you just trace the circumference of that log like that, and then you flip it over and take a chainsaw and you serrate it, and then you take a hatchet or an axe. I used a hatchet mostly, and made a groove, and then that groove had to fit over here. Well, when I was doing it on the cabin, I'd never done anything that refined before. You get sometimes like big gaps, and you'd have to kick the log off. You couldn't use it. So this little cabin, like the other one, you don't see it here, but every 12 inches, every foot, there's a rebar pounded down in between each one. So that rebar also, you had to drill a hole up on the top, put the rebar in, and slam it down. Next. So this is when I was working on the studio, using my Echo chainsaw. So when the logs started to when the walls started to get too high, I had to start the saw on the ground and then pull it up with a rope. And if the carburetor was being finicky, it would, and you'd have to go back down, and you'd have to do it again. So it's a lot of work. This particular picture I put on one of my Facebook pages, and this guy says, oh yeah, this is just like Chainsaw Massacre heaven. OSHA would sue you for this or fine you for this because you don't have a helmet, you don't have this, and you got the bar this way, and blah, blah, blah. And I just went back. They didn't have that stuff when I was doing this, you know. So I just texted him back or messaged him back. I said, well, at least I put a shirt on. And I did start out with a 24-inch bar, which was too much for me, so I'm to an 18-inch. Click. Yeah, so this is what I was talking about, the notch. Oftentimes I use something called a log dog, which was basically a long piece of rebar with 2 spikes, and you put it in like this. But if it was balanced enough or I was lazy, I would just use my leg as a log dog. And in this book, because Jim was this man who I hired to help me, and he was a big, strapping, 6-foot guy, and he could use an axe to do it like this, and I couldn't because I wasn't that big. And so after I messed up a couple of logs, I threw the axe down, and I grabbed my little hatchet, and I could do the work with the hatchet. Next. Thank you for doing this, by the way. What's your name?
Natalia.
Natalia, thank you, Natalia. So this is the studio I built. The reason I built it too is because the bears were breaking into my cabin, and they were literally, I'd run into them night and day. And I did until I had to deal with it between a mom and a sow. So I said, well, if I'm going to live up here, first I was going to build this studio because if I ever had company, I wanted to go paint by myself and not be interrupted, right? That was easier said than done. So then the bears came and I realized, oh, I got to have a bear-proof cellar, so the bears can't get my food. So I spent one summer. I think this is a 16 by 14, either 14 by 14 or 16 by 16. Dug this hole. It took me one whole summer to dig a hole, and then the next summer, I had help. We built forms and we poured this cement foundation. Well, to pour this cement foundation, you just don't pour it. You get the cement up and the sand, and you mix it in a wheelbarrow, and you take it down in the wheelbarrow down this hill, and then you like lift it up and you pour it into the forms. So that was.
How many times? Hundreds?
I don't know. I just know that when I would get done, ending the day of work at 4 would be like a short day, and I would like literally my back would be like, oh God, I can't move. But yeah, so I built this and so I could do my painting in it. Click. This is actually an old picture. So what happened? There's a porch out there with skylights and everything. So the summer after I built it, I sold 40 acres, my lower 40 acres, and that cabin was on it, that studio was on it. So I never, ever got to use it, and the people who purchased the property have never done anything with it. So it's just kind of in decay. But Babe in the Woods self-portrait, it's kind of got overlapping stories about the bears, building this studio, and also my development as an artist. Click. So this was changed the chapter here. So in between that, I got married, and I was married for 26 years until my husband died. And I would go up still to the cabin by myself, like for a week at times or more. And one summer in 2015, I was driving there, and I see this big plume of smoke like 25 miles away, and I think, oh, it's a grease fire somewhere. Well, anyway, it turned out to be there was a 150-acre fire the night before that nobody put out, and the winds fanned it. So this is what I saw when I was pulling into the town of John Day, where my cabin is. And I went up to the police department, and I said, I have property at Pine Creek. Do you think it's safe? They said, no. I went anyway. Pull up to the Pine Creek, and it's clear blue. I go, oh, this is no problem. I get to the creek, park the truck, and within a few minutes, there's like these flaming pieces of moss that are falling down, and psh, psh. So I got out, left, and there was fire crews coming up. So I showed them where my cabin was, and they pinpointed it on the map for protection. Click. They went up there. Had I not been coming down, my cabin would have been toast because they put it in their fire map. I mean, it wasn't coincident. It was kind of a miracle. So they were dropping retardant over it. They bulldozed lines around it. They put 3 pumps on the cabin, and that's why it saved. The fire literally came up to my property line. But the ironic thing about this is the year after, I went back up to the cabin, year after, I had a guy up helping me check the chimney pipe, and it was out. How they fit together, it was out. Well, the force of this retardant plane had knocked the chimney apart. So if that hadn't been caught, I could have lost the cabin to a fire by a fire retardant drop. Click. And these guys sent me this picture. These were these guys, they literally camped out below the cabin, kept 3 pumps on the cabin from the creek. When I was allowed to go back up a month later and they'd taken the pumps out, I had to use a crowbar to get into the cabin because it was so swollen. I had a cup in the sink. It was full of water. There was another pie plan where I put some mice bait in there. It was full of water. That's how much water went into this cabin. It took me months to dry out, but you know what? It saved it. It totally changed the color of the wood. And when I went up there, everything was red. The logs are red. The green metal roof was red. The rocks are red. It was the color red that plane was dropping. Next. So in between that, I do paintings. This is part of the valley. This is this was a sketch. It's weird colors. Next. I paint by the full moonlight. So down in the valley, I'll go down in between 10 and 2, and preset a palette and paint the landscape. Well, and what's interesting is the landscape down below the valley. Click. Sketch. Click. These are sketches of the views from the property. Old growth Ponderosa. Click. Yeah, it's this one. So this is a view that I normally paint down below the mountains. Now all that has been burned up. It's all charcoal now. So these landscapes I've been painting for 40 years are charcoal. Click. So now I have, I moved to the Dalles, Oregon 7 years ago, so I could be closer to the cabin. Prior to that, I lived in Port Townsend, Washington, which was like a 10 to 12 hour drive. This takes me 4 hours, and I go to the cabin at least twice a month. So this is literally right outside my house. I live right on the river. Click. And this is the new place I built. It's like totally the antithesis of the cabin. You just push a button, there's everything, you know. So yeah, I have my galleries down here. I live up there, and my studio's back there. Click. So I wrote, what I said in my life is I'm only going to write 3 books. I'm going to write 3 books about the cabin. So I did the first one, Babe in the Woods, Building a Life One Log at a Time, and it details the building process. Don't use this as an instruction guide, please. But it gives you all the ins and outs. There are some references. William Hunt is I think he wrote in the 1930s. He's a book I used a lot to reference to get your consistency of chink and what tools you should get. So Babe in the Woods self-portrait takes off after that. Now I'm in my 20s, early 20s, and also developing as an artist. And I'm using journals. These books are constructed on journals. And the language and the writing style, I think, matures along with the writer. So this is more of like written teenage style. And then this gets a little more evolved in the language. Click. This one is now in editing, Babe in the Woods, Path of Totality, which should be out this year. And it takes you actually up to COVID time, like how COVID changed, how I was at the cabin, got to the cabin, how COVID changed the culture, and things that I went through. Can you click down one back? No, go the other way. Yeah, this book designer I work with, he's really cool. So he got the first book, he put all the little symbols and things of what I was doing then. It was basically building. And then he's got this one that evolves as my artist self. No, click. And then this one, he put my little dogs in there because they come all the time. So we got the COVID mask. So I have never used a computer up there, and it wasn't until I think in June I was up there. Oh, I know, it was May 20th. It was my birthday. I went up there, and I'd always kept a cell phone with me, but you don't get cell phone reception, but I kept it in case I was out hiking and I died. Somebody could ping me. But then I'm up there on May 28th, and my phone rings. what is this? Well, it was my friend from South Africa calling. And this is weird. So now I have intermittent cell phone connection. But when I'm up there, I keep it off because I have this, I get twitchy around, like when I'm on the phone too much or the computer's too much. And I want to turn that part of it off. So anyway, the book designer put the, those little symbols of, I no longer write on a typewriter up there. I write still longhand, and then I come back and I translate it back in computer. The deaths I experienced in the fire. And it's interesting because I like what he did with the colors. Next. So the other book I wrote, actually I wrote this before The Babe in the Woods. So I spent 6 years in Kuwait as an art professor teaching art to Muslim women. And it's kind of, I'm reference to this because it's kind of the same thing about this cabin. It was like, oh, I'm going to build a log cabin. I'm just going to go do this. I had no idea what I was getting into. So I said, oh, okay, yeah. I'll work as an art professor in Kuwait. I had no idea what I was getting into. So this book kind of chronicles that 6 years. Next. So I'm on, you can go to my websites. I'm on Facebook in these areas. I don't do Twitter. I don't do, what's that other thing, Instagram? I have an Instagram account, but I don't use it. And that's Zachary. But I want to read just the prologue so you can get a flavor of what the second book is about. So, bears had never bothered me before I shot one that summer on the mountain. As a borderline vegetarian, I reasoned since I deliberately killed an animal, I had to eat a bit of an animal deliberately killed. Not entirely to restore karmic equilibrium, but so I could chew upon the carnal rush of slaughter. On that summer day when hummingbirds drilled air hot enough to bake vanilla smells out of ponderosa pine, I waited, primed to kill, on my log cabin porch. When a black bear parted brush and stopped midway in crossing the creek, I grasped a 30-30 resting by my thigh, leveled it on a 2x4 nailed across the railing, aimed, fired. The bear's eyes blew open in shock before it faltered, staggered upright, and bolted in a tilted gait, upwind of a bullet so immediately braced. Days after the bear had been found dead, I felt the need to eat meat to restore the cosmic balance knocked off kilter. A mere trigger squeeze is all it took. It had to be wild, killed in the wild, and not from the bear I shot. I bummed a frozen elk steak from a runty hunter. After it thawed, I roasted the meat on a green willow stick over a twiggy fire beside the flashing creek, within spitting distance of where only days before I'd blown out a black bear's rib bone with a borrowed rifle at 300 feet. I seared venison until it was brown as the branch piercing it, until flames licked away and nearly blackened what cardinal red was left of an animal that, like the bear, had browsed a season before upon pale green, shivery shoots. When it cooled, I bit into that charred chunk and chewed. The creek continued to flow. The forest practiced its natural order. Every leaf, twig, pine needle, rock, and pine cone in the forest report. But the animal in me got all riled up, and I choked up before I could swallow the fear that had taken us both down. Miles above Oregon's John Day Valley, I felled buck-skinned notch and chinked a log cabin together from trees, Douglas, red, white, fir, and tamarack to classify a predominant few. I was a skinny 18-year-old fresh out of orthodontic braces when I began to rebuild the home I lost 4 years before when orphan replaced the name of daughter. The road leading to my backwoods home is so rutted and steep, even the most souped-up, air-shocked four-wheel drives lose traction in stretches named for disasters at these places. The Eliminator and Shit and Slide are but two. Given the amount of rain or snow, it is often swifter and safer to hike than it is to drive this road that ends beneath indigenous peaks named after a blushing berry. I live there alone when I am not involved in occupations to bank income so I can buy time to live off the grid and ungridded. This log cabin is the only place I have to call home. It sits as empty as I feel when I am not there. There is no lock on the door. Sometimes, depending on the work I'm bungling, tasks that involve steely, razor-sharp, pointy tools and dirt, I answer to dimwit, addle-brained, and loser, dumbass, or dumb shit, occasionally interweave my own self-calling. The summer I shot the bear, I added murderer to my list of nicknames, despite the fact I was a conscientious objector aided by Gandhi's teachings, one of his lessons. There are many causes that I'm prepared to die for, but no cause that I'm prepared to kill for. I've convoluted my practice of philosophy by dispatching an animal I was not prepared to die for. A rational impulse, either a bear was going to get me or I was going to get a bear. Who did who in first, abet one's good fortune. A rifle greatly leveraged my winning odds. On a pine board shelf next to my loft bed, among erudite tomes and outdated encyclopedias, is a hardback copy of The Prophet, the once shiny cover now scuffed and dog-eared. I keep that book beside me when I sleep in the belief that dreaming beside Gibran's works, soulful words, generates a token of divine light, like a halo surrounding this solitary life wrestling me to the mat. One passage is underlined and read again and again. Your living is determined not so much by what life brings to you as by the attitude you bring to life, not so much by what happens to you as the way your mind looks at, but what happens, how your mind looks. I am 22, my family is dead, what I call home is a stack of logs in the Strawberry Mountains, my best friend is a cat. Out of principle for life, until I ate that venison, I didn't eat furry things. This is what I looked at. So that's the beginning of the second book. And in the books, as I'm writing them, some of the elements overlap, like I referred to the same trees, the same tools, the same people. In the third book, Path of Totality, all the characters I mentioned in all the other two books are gone. Everybody's dead. I'm the last character in this series. So I hope you get a chance to look at my website. Again, please don't, if you think this is going to be a how-to book, it's not. Yeah, so anybody have any questions?
Your third book isn't out yet?
It's not out, it's at the editors right now. Yeah.
So like, kind of in the timeline of your Babe in the Woods books, at what point were you teaching art in Kuwait?
I taught art in Kuwait from 2004 to 2010. But it was a great academic job because it allowed me to come back to the States for the whole summer. So a lot of it I still spent up there.
Do you mention it all, teaching in Kuwait?
I do in the next book, Path of Totality. Just I briefly touch on it. But one interesting thing about writing is I've been working with a scriptwriter for 3 years. We're developing a movie on this one. And it's like he works in Hollywood, so he knows the genre, he knows the people. And in order to get a movie produced, you have to have certain ethnic diversity in it. And our agent said, well, there's no black people in the book. I said, I know, I don't even think I've ever seen a black person in John Day. So they changed one of my friends into an African American. So I read this interview by Margaret Atwood, who did The Handmaid's Tales, and it was about when she gave her book over to the scriptwriters, and she said it's like you give them a hanger, you forget about your book, and you just give them this hanger, and the producers, the writers, the designers, they all put whatever they want onto it. So I had to step back and say, okay, it's like when I wrote my doctoral dissertation, at one point, you just have to keep jumping through hoops. And if you want to get the thing done, you have to jump through the hoops. It's the same with this. So I just had to give it over to the scriptwriter. And he changes things. So like my brother committed suicide, my brother who really committed suicide, who you read about in actually all the books, he commits suicide in this book. Look, that was like, he didn't commit suicide for like maybe 25 years after that. But so the agent said, well, you got to have your brother commit suicide in this book. Okay.
Do you have another book prior to any of these? I think it was called, my first introduction to your name and stuff was a book called The Journal, I think, a summer.
Oh, I wrote Cabin Journal and 3 Summers.
Yes.
And they were published when I was like really young. They weren't edited or anything. They were published by this small publisher called Shameless Hussy Press in San Francisco. And I eventually got the rights back to them. And I drew on, actually, the first one, Cabin Journal, is based on this one. This one's based on Cabin Journal, and this one's based on 3 Summers. So what I did is took those journal entries and fleshed them out into stories. Any other questions? Yeah.
What compelled you to start keeping journals while you were out there? Did you have any sense that this was like an experience in your life that you would want to share with people eventually, or was it just a personal activity?
I was just in one of these other workshops, and somebody was doing a journal, and it was a way to keep company. So that's how it was. It was like I didn't have anybody up there, and I didn't have any radio or TV. I had no diversion. So it was a way for me to keep company and also to chronicle the development of the cabin. Yeah. Yeah, when there was one wildfire scared too much, I took all the journals. They were all in those, those college 8.5 by 11 notebooks. I had like 4 milk crates of those things. So I hauled those around for a while. Well, it's 3 o'clock. Thank you so much. Oh, if you want the book, I think they've got this book up at the front desk, and I can go up there and sign it if you want. Yeah, so enjoy my books. Wait for the movie to come out. See how many lies are in it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.